All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Randy Bartley. I'll be moderating this session, this presentation by Doug Somm. Mr. Somm has a variety of experience across different sectors of the defense and energy industries. He began his career working for the Department of Energy at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the Stockpile Manufacturing and Support Group. Mr. Somm re-entered the energy industry in 2011 and now serves as the CTO at TPE. He is the inventor of the ZVAC, am I saying that correctly?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. ZVAC technology, and enjoys continuously pushing the company to new heights while leaving a lasting positive impact on the natural gas industry. Mr. Somm earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois, currently holds his professional engineering license in Oklahoma for mechanical engineering. Doug?
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, you bet.
Good morning. Thank you all for making time and picking this from an extensive menu of dinner options. But let's see, how do I get back on? There we go. Who knows what we just did? Thanks for the introduction, Randy. My name's Doug Somm. We've been working on what I would call the blowdown problem for a number of years, before it was cool, as our technicians like to say. And we come at it with, I think, a focus or a vantage point that's a little different from most of the methane discussion, in that where we really look is the intentionality side of it. So you have a lot of emissions and some very cool technology that centers around finding it, right? So drones, lasers, satellites, huge inspection programs that try to find it. Where we look at it is, I've already got a guy and a wrench, and there is no finding, right? It's an intentional act. And so the way I've got this presentation set up today is basically why intentionality matters. A whole bunch of examples across the E&P all the way down to service lines going into houses, where intentional venting happens and what some companies are doing about it. And then how we're in a lot of conversations where these companies that have put net zero plans out there are now coming to grips with that reality and saying, well, how are we actually going to do this? And so I'll show a few examples of sort of jobs, projects, and then programmatic, like how are people doing this? How are they structuring it? So before we get into it, just a quick survey for myself to know what applications to focus on. How many of you are in the upstream, like E&P gathering world? Transmission, compressor stations. Okay. How about NGL, Y-grade? Anybody doing liquid stuff? Okay. And then distribution. Anybody from the LDC, the gas company that you pay your bill to? Okay. So that's the part we can blow through. So let's see. Is this gonna go for me? Let's see. So we'll start off with why intentional venting. And the short answer is there's a lot of reasons that intentional venting matters, and from our perspective, it should get focus. The first is safety. So what a lot of people don't know is one of the worst industrial accidents in the history of the world. In general, there's a chemical spill in India that takes number one, killed a couple thousand people. In the top 3 to 5, arguably, was an accident in Mexico in 1984 where a facility had both venting activity and flaring activity happening in separate corners of the facility, and due to the conditions that day, it didn't dissipate. So you ended up with a huge vapor cloud that eventually hit the other side of the facility where you had flaring activity, and it destroyed an entire town. So venting has an inherent risk to it, because anytime you release, you create a fuel air mix, right? You are putting two parts of the fire triangle together on purpose every time you do this. And you're hopefully spending a whole lot of effort making sure that third one, the ignition source, isn't there, because otherwise you got the two. So, you know, if you look through the NTSB and the different accident reports, you'd be surprised how many times you have something like a blowdown or a vent or a valve that gets left open, and you introduce that third part of the triangle, and all of a sudden you're there, right? So every time you vent, you have a safety situation, whether you like it or not. You got two out of three present. So we believe safety is sort of the precursor, and that's what drives a lot of what falls out, which is a bunch of regulation, right? So our industry tends to see safety leads to regulation like the Pipes Act, which is now being, anybody on DOT pipe, PHMSA? Yeah, so Section 114 of this rule basically says you got to have an O&M manual update that addresses emissions. You can't do nothing. You have to do something. We're not telling you what, but you got to do something. So figure it out. So that's in effect now. And what you're seeing here is kind of this confluence of the way liquids rules are all written, right? Liquids has always been very environmental focused. I do not want to spill oil, right? The gas rules have always been public safety, and you're seeing this pushing together of the way those rules are written. So you're seeing more environmental stuff on the gas side, and the liquid side largely has picked up the safety aspect of the regulations. The next reason intentional on-purpose venting matters is the EPA. Quad O, people have familiarity. Quad OA came next. Quad OB and C guidance has been issued. Final ruling probably this year. This is a big deal. Quad OB talks about retrofitting. You can't have liquids unloading. You can't have flaring. I mean, there's tons of, you can't have venting associated with liquids unloading. And one of the key phrases in Quad OB is that any instance of a well unloading pulls you into Quad OC. Quad OC is the biggest regulatory shift that I have seen, because this is not about new facilities. This is about everything that's already out there. Quad OC is about going back to your old stuff and bringing it up to the latest and greatest. This is a huge deal. This is maybe tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. Quad OC is a big deal. And it is very hard to imagine that intentional releases are going to be a thing that's okay when they're also on the, making everybody go back and catch every little bleeder, every valve actuator. You're not going to be allowed to blow down to fix this stuff, right? You're not going to be allowed to event the facility to address this. These are huge. Right, the one that makes the news nowadays is the investor stuff. So anybody can Google it, and I can now pull emissions data by producer, by basin, ranked by production versus emissions. So if I'm an investor that is touting ESG or any of these metrics, this data is coming out, right? There's people flying these drones. I mean, they're all over this conference, right? All the satellite folks, they're putting out here how much emissions these guys have versus production. This is a big deal. And everybody can get to it now, right? So this changes what used to be something I would consider was sort of an internal thing. Like we even know, but nobody else really knows and can't stack us against each other. You can now. And so this is going to end up mattering, right? And then, so you get data like that coming out, and then you get the SEC. So this is really important and very, I don't think, well understood by our industry. The Securities and Exchange Commission came out and said, your sustainability reports, the environmental stuff you publish, counts as a disclosure. Just like your audited financials, this is now a thing that can be audited. So you can't just make up whatever you want to sound good and put it in these Going Green reports. You now have an audit trail that has to go with it. So when you say we're going to reduce emissions by 30% by this year, that's now an investor disclosure, right? That can be audited. So they come out, SEC published this rule that basically said scope 1 and 2 emissions have to be disclosed and quantified, right? So this is between the EPA rule and the SEC publishing this. This is a humongous shift in the way emissions are treated by our industry, because it used to be very voluntary, very do your best, effort counts, to it's audited. There's no A for effort now. It's did you do it or not, right? And this is going to be, you're not going to get people like PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, right? These people are now going to be auditing emission stuff. This is a big deal, and I don't think very many people know about it. Who's tried to get a permit recently? Right? It's really hard. If anybody listens to any of the public comment periods or any of the, let's just hear from the town hall, this is brutal for our industry as a whole. The not in my backyard problem is very hard to tackle that problem with any kind of credibility when you also blow gas, when you also do blowdowns, and then you're trying to convince the public, please let us build this thing in your neighborhood. Trust us, we're good at it, it's clean. But what I'm about to do is going to shake the ground, right? This is hard to rectify with the public. And FERC, so the federal permits, right? These are the big pipes, big import-export terminals, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, right? They came out with, so their whole, mission from the government is to make sure a project serves the public good. And they came out and said, in order to do that, we have to understand a project's greenhouse gas emissions. So what you're seeing across the EPA, the DOT, the SEC, and FERC now is this tectonic shift in the way regulation of emissions is happening, and it's changing dramatically toward the way the liquids world works. So if you have a spill, a liquid spill, you have to report it, right? You have to disclose it. And if you were caught spilling it on purpose, think about how that plays, right? If you go to the liquids terminal people and you say, hey, do you have any SOPs that say, just go out there and open that drain, dump it? It doesn't happen, right? It's a containment mentality. And what you're seeing is a whole bunch of regulation coming that pushes the gas industry that way. And tactically, right, New Mexico, Colorado, the states are advancing faster than the federal, right? But they're all headed to the same place. So if you've read, anybody operate in New Mexico? Yeah, it's fun. Colorado's right behind them. Maybe you argue they're ahead if you're trying to build anything new in Colorado. You get into the detail. The way insurance policies work. Insurance is structured to start your GL, right? Who got big insurance policies, right? We're oil and gas, everybody has big insurance, it's in all your MSAs. Every single company, every contractor goes out and gets these big liability policies so that if you hurt somebody, you have an accident, there's insurance. Insurance, since the 80s, most insurance policies carry a total pollution exclusion, which means none of your GL covers pollution. So then everybody who cares about pollution goes out and gets a pollution policy. Pollution policies are written to cover sudden and accidental pollution. So this means we have an accident, something happens, and there's a release of something, right? That's sudden and accidental pollution. There's an insurance policy that kicks in that covers the remediation and fixing it all. What is excluded from all these policies is anything that's intentional. So you go out and do, and this is just the way the legal system is set up, right? If you accidentally hit someone with your car, you have an auto liability policy, you have coverage that covers that accident. If they find out you were texting with your buddy and said, I'm going to hit this, and then you go do it, you think your insurance policy covers that? No, it's a felony. It's treated totally differently. By insurance, by legal, intentionality isn't covered by insurance, and it generally opens up criminal or punitive damages. So if you hurt someone by accident, it's an insurable thing. If you hurt someone and it's in one of your procedures to do it that way, it opens up punitive damages. So what we're going to see happen as these regulations come is companies are going to have to look at the way their insurance stack works and their contract stack works. There's going to be an issue where if you intentionally blow stuff and trip over these rules, your contractor's insurance isn't going to cover it. You're not going to be able to seek, there's an insurance gap when there's intentionality, because the coverages don't generally do things that are on purpose. Federal lands, this is another one where if you're in it, you're all the way in it, and it's a big deal. If you're not, it doesn't really matter to you. But federal lands have some really strict rules around venting and flaring. And then PR, right? Who works for a company that's doing ESG PR? Anybody putting out, we're super sustainable, right? We're putting out these ads, and if you've seen any of the literature coming out of our entire industry, right? There's a huge PR problem for our business, where nobody wants to be coal, right? We in the 70s, natural gas was the clean energy future of the world, right? And somehow we have lost that footing. And my opinion is we need to get it back through storytelling, right? When Texas froze solid and everybody had no power, we should have had ads on TV of a guy who has natural gas. He's had his fridge on, all his friends over. They are watching TV in a hot tub because he's all natural gas, right? Like, we need to tell good stories about natural gas, and we don't do a great job of it because most of our industry is about the less I'm seen, the better I'm doing, right? Put my pipe underground, nobody even knows I'm here. Perfect. Like, we have got to get better handle on PR as an industry. And then, of course, there's MMBLG. Is anybody familiar with that? It affects every single one of you, I guarantee it. Make my boss look good. Right? So when you talk with most people who are thinking about their company for the next 10 years and thinking about who's going to lead it into the future, one of the things that I try to tell the younger people is everybody hears about this huge wave of retirement, right? Well, those people who are retiring are looking at their lieutenants and saying, who's ready to step up? Who's going to lead for the next 10 years? And I would advocate the people who can get a hold of how to operate within a new ESG framework are going to be viewed as the next generation of this industry. So make your boss look good. Go do your project without blowing it down. Tell them about it. Use it for PR. this will go well for you, right? So all those things kind of, they're all putting this pressure on intentional releases. Doing this on purpose, blowing gas on purpose, a million reasons why not to do it. Well, wait, there's more. Company culture. Our industry does a tremendous job of pushing a safety culture, right? How many of you are in a safety meeting every morning? Safety moment at the beginning of every meeting, tailgate meeting, JSA. We do a really good job of pushing safety all the way down to every pair of boots we have. Do a great job of pushing safety culture. How would it go in one of those safety meetings where you ask your guys, you're signing off the JSA, right, passing it around, and you're talking about every hazard that's present on this job. And then you say, like, this time, just go do it. Like, forget about all that stuff we just talked about, go do it. The not safe, right? When you talk about pushing a culture of environmental stewardship or sustainability into your company, you can't have all these meetings. You can't have all these sustainability meetings. Here's a new policy, here's a new program, here's a new initiative. But today I just need you to go blow this down so we can work on it. Right? You can't get a culture shift when you have this caveat for, yeah, we're supposed to find every leak and fix it right away, but blow this down. Just let the gas go. Right? You just can't reconcile that. Right? And that the other version of that is the way we appear to the public. Right? So if I'm a gas company and I'm preaching to the public, we are a sustainable industry, we're a sustainable utility, we are really good at this. But I'm on YouTube blowing stuff down, or somebody with one of these satellites just put an article in Bloomberg that, I'll pick on Energy Transfer because it just happened last week. 50-mile plume seen from space, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, they're running a commercial that says, we are the clean energy. You can't do it, right? You can't bring venting on purpose together with this message pushing out both inside our company culture and to the public. If you're blowing gas on purpose, they can't sell both, right? You just, it doesn't work for safety. Nobody would be caught dead with a safety meeting, safety programs, and then saying, but in this procedure, forget PPE. You just can't do it, right? It doesn't go together. But wait, there's even more. Intentionality of releases is a legal framework from the refrigerant industry that is completely written around intentionality. So having a leaky refrigerator is not against the law. Releasing Freon is a federal crime. You can look up Clean Air Act violations and find guys who go to federal prison for stealing refrigerators because they undo the tubes and they take the copper out. And what they get strung up on in court is not stealing copper, it's Clean Air Act. Because venting it is a federal crime. Doing it on purpose, stealing air conditioners off the side of a construction site when it doesn't have refrigerant in it is like a misdemeanor, depending on how much the AAC is worth. Doing it once that Freon is connected or the refrigerant is in there, the federal crime. So you have a huge precedent, a legal precedent that's been in place for decades that's centered on intentionality and how to enforce it, how to bring it to trial, how to put people in jail for it. And this is already happening. So intentionality brings easy enforceability. If I am on the enforcement side of any of these regulatory agencies, how do I enforce that, yeah, they probably should have gotten to that leak maybe quicker, but it's a leak or a line strike, or, you know, hey, this happened, it was unintended, this rod packing wore out before its maintenance cycle and they had some emissions. That's really hard to enforce. Catching somebody on camera, opening valves, blowing clouds into the air, this is handcuffed. These guys got handcuffed out in the woods. Like, put the pigging out technicians in handcuffs, Department of Justice, guns. This is a real thing that happened. It's public. I'm not spilling anybody's dirty laundry. You can read about it. But when you talk to these guys, they're like, what was I supposed to do? This is my job. I have to go blow down pig barrels, put a pig in. This is what I do every day. Intentionality brings enforcement because you're getting caught. Right? It's not a show me all these records and let's figure this out and we'll talk about how you can do better. We're talking about handcuffs. So what's anybody doing about it? All right, thanks for watching our commercial. But, basically what we've been doing for the last, 10 years or so has been getting that call afterward, right? So the handcuffs part has happened, and now the regulator and the operator are coming to terms on settling, right? Settling the consent decree or whatever it is. And a lot of times we get this phone call that says, hey, I'm not sure how this is going to play out, but what I can tell you is we are not going to be allowed to do this anymore. So let's figure out what we're going to do instead. And that led us to end up with this equipment that's a liquids person would know it as a trash pump or a double diaphragm pump type. It's an air-powered tool that you bring out to your job site to take liquids out of a pipe, and in our case, it's gas or NGLs or whatever it is. And the way that this ends up getting deployed varies a lot by the company and what they view as sort of the low-hanging fruit or the hot spot. So I'm going to show you an example of what one company is doing, and then I'm going to run through just a whole bunch of applications, touch on them super fast, and then I'm trying to finish in time to allow some discussion and questions and things, so we can go back to any of these applications if you'd like. But here's one from one of our customers. So when we look at vent gas recovery, which is sort of a generic term for instead of releasing it, we're gonna recover it somehow. The spectrum of work varies a ton. So when you think about all of the places in our industry that venting happens, we tend to sort of chop it up by what the companies do. So there's usually E&P type work, out on the well pad, gathering and processing, right? This is your wet gas gathering, your pigging work, your gas plants. After the gas plant, you sort of have two worlds. You have the NGL refined product world, and then you have the gas transmission compressor station, big pipe world, and then at the other end you get the distribution companies who are in the neighborhoods and in the urban settings. And then within each of those segments, the venting happens on this spectrum. And this is something that's important for companies to understand because it changes the way you go about work. You have some huge releases that happen every once in a while, right? So blowing down 30 miles of 30-inch, you don't do that every day, right? Hopefully, right? It's a project. There's a project manager. There's engineers. This is a game planned thing that we're going to go do. Huge release, relatively not real often. All the way to the other end, where you got guys changing filters, doing compressor maintenance, doing meter and regulator work. This is not a project. This is a big list, and I got 80 of them to do this month, and we go to work, right? So those releases tend to be much smaller. Blowing down a meter skid to do a meter prover or something like that, it's tiny volume. We have crews that do it every day. And this is exaggerated when you talk about like gathering pigging, like launching a pig. It's not a big volume. You run 100,000 pigs a year, which some people do. Now you're talking about something, right? Same thing, distribution companies. Who's got gas at their house? You guys got the meter where they can read it just by driving by, right? Or pick it up on Bluetooth. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but they don't have to come look at the dial anymore. So you look at a city, so I'll use Minneapolis as a good example. They have roughly 1 million meters in the city. They're on a 10-year program to go to the Bluetooth stuff, which means they replace over about 100,000 meters a year. If you're blowing down from the curve tee to that meter 100,000 times a year. It's a lot. That's tiny, right? It's 1.5 inch pipe from the curb to your house, but you do that 100,000 times a year in Minneapolis. And then you have that going on in every city in the entire country. Right now you're starting to talk about an aggregate problem that's huge, right? So when we look at this kind of work, this big stuff gets all the attention. This is what gets you on the news, this is what gets you on a satellite picture. But all this tiny stuff, this is where your workforce is. This is where the public is, right? So you really have to look at this stuff on a spectrum where the impacts are different, right? And that's just a small list. There are tons of examples of this stuff. So I'm going to fly through these, but this is just a cross-section of like what exists, right? There's vent gas recovery in well unloading, right? This is the E&P world. Your surface equipment, your gathering, pigging. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time, but perks. You get into gas plants. Gas plants have a maintenance crew, right? That does nothing but maintenance all the time. Valve maintenance, control systems maintenance. Generally speaking, you have to blow things down to work on them, right? It's not safe to weld on something with a bunch of gas in it. So there's a lot of blowdowns that happen in gas plant maintenance. You get into NGLs and Y-grade, especially in the wintertime, you can't get this pipe empty. Even if you opened all the valves, it won't empty, right? Because the butane in the winter doesn't flash. Like it takes forever. A lot of flaring work where we get involved with pumping these products out. Has anybody ever worked in the terminals, like a marine terminal? Okay, I'm sure some of your companies have facilities in terminals. In a terminal, most of your ships have extremely automated fire control systems. They call it fire eyes, right? It's these infrared sensors that look for flame and kick on all the foam systems. You think you can light a flare in one of these? You'd cause a soap suds foaming event on all these big ships, right? You can't vent in these places. There's too many uncontrolled ignition sources. You can't flare because you'll set off the fire control. Doing maintenance work in a facility is very hard. So we get involved in a lot of these situations where you don't want to vent it, you don't want to flare it. You know, vent gas recovery makes a lot of sense. Power plants are the same way. You're on shared right-of-way, you have high energy electric, typically on your right-of-way. Nobody wants to blow a cloud of flammable air up into a bunch of power lines. Next best, okay, well, we'll flare it. You think your power company is going to let you flare underneath there? No, right? So do a lot of power plant work, do a lot of compressor station work. These are usually permitted facilities. You get these calls around October, November. Right? I've run out of my permit emissions. Now I can't do any maintenance. Come help. We do a lot of that. Integrity management, pigging work, lots of pipeline repair work. Right? You don't get to pick your location. You got a problem, you got to go there and fix it. Valve testing. I'm just going to fly through some of these because at the end of my time here, but you know, blowing down entire pipelines, right? This is another application where, you know, you don't want to get on the news. Flare replacement work. Anybody ever seen a flare carry over? Okay, it's like lava. Nobody wants that. Gas flaring, not that big of a deal. Gas flaring with a bunch of sludge that comes up, big deal. Thermal oxidizers, right? We do a ton of, my thermal oxidizer is supposed to be X, and they just came out and emissions tested it, and it's not. So we got to do something else until they get it fixed. Meters, regulators, like all this kind of work, right? And then the distribution stuff, which I understand we don't have a distribution crowd. Vent odorized gas, you got a problem. And then what I really want to show you guys to wrap up here is there's a few different approaches companies are taking to tackle this stuff. One is what we call a programmatic approach. This follows what safety programs do, what integrity management programs do. This is where you rank, you come up with some impact factors like how often do we do it, how much gas is it, how close to the public is it, and you rank out all your applications. So this starts with an intern or somebody searching your O&M manual for release, vent, purge, list them all out, and then start ranking them. And then you come up with a program where you tackle, you know, the biggest impact first, and then you work your way down the list. We also see a standards-based approach. So who works for a company they would describe as engineering gets to call the shots? Nobody? That's shocking. Right, so you see this, right? Some companies are taking a standards-based approach where you write it into your bid packages and then your contractors do it, right? So you come up with some spec language, and here's an example. Pipeline cleaning, there's ILI involved, there's filters, and you know, we're putting this in our language so that our contractors start thinking about it, right? I'm not coming out hard and fast and saying everybody has to do this on every project. But I'm saying if I put it in my RFP, then at least my contractors will go Google it and start working on this problem for me. We see cost-based approach, right? Who's been asked by somebody to look at dollars per MCF, right? This is kind of the big, how much is it all going to cost? In the energy business, 40% of companies have a cost established, what they are willing to pay or are paying for emissions reduction. What that number is ranges from 0 to over $100 a ton. By putting these metrics out there, what you end up doing, if you publish this in your organization, you drive this all the way down to your project people. Right, you basically say, we're going to hit your project budget with $1 per MCF that you emit. So you got to account for it as an ops guy, right? As a project engineer, we're going to ding you every time you release. So then your operations people, everybody who's working on projects starts solving this for you. So it pushes it all the way down the company. And then we also see this goal backward approach, right? This is where somebody's already stated where they're going to be in 2030 or 2050, and they start working their way backward. We have companies who have stated they are not going to have planned releases by 2030. They believe to make that possible, they have to be 95% of the way there by 2025. That the last 5% of planned releases will take as much time and effort and money as the previous 95% combined, right? Because you use up all your good stuff, right? You do all the easy stuff first, and then you're left with this really hard stuff at the end. And so people ask me, how do we get started? There's a million applications, there's a million ways to do this. How do you get started? Right? Okay, this is the end. Right? You start connecting with people. You come to stuff like this. You talk to industry people that have been working on it longer than most of us have, and they can give you some guidance on, what to do, how to get started. So with that, that's the end of my prepared remarks, and I'm out of time. So I really appreciate you guys sticking with me, and I hope, if anything, blowing gas will bite you in the ass.